Welcome to our panel discussion. I'm, of course, your host, Nadine Spence. With the announcement that Civics would be reintroduced to schools in December 2022 and the launch of ChatGPT in November of the same year, tonight we're comparing the two and look at the adoption rates of both at the secondary school level. We're joined by Linvern Wright, President of the Jamaica Association of Principals and Vice Principals, JAPS, and Godiva Golding, who is founder of STEAM House, an education hub focused on science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I think tonight we are perhaps comparing both and looking at, how is ChatGPT being handled in schools. I know we've had conversations about it at the tertiary level, but I think tonight we're looking at the secondary level and then wondering how does it engage the teaching of civics, how does it help, or how does it hinder? So let me start with you, Linvern Wright. Just last year, 2022, there was the announcement that civics would be reintroduced in schools. Do you know how that is going?
Well, I think for many schools, it has been implemented. I think some schools have a challenge with how packed the curriculum is and maybe wondering what is it that we take out of it in order to put this in and maybe have to find innovative ways of dealing with it. Because I think at the grades 7 to 9, in high schools, it is already a very packed curriculum. There are so many things that children have to deal with. But it's a matter of how we prioritize things. Maybe one of the things that we ought to be doing, just generally, is to look at what it is we may need to say, okay, that goes one side for something as critical as civics to be in the curriculum. But essentially, I think that many schools are phasing it in and working through how they get it into their syllabus.
Ms. Golding, ever so often you hear shivers of fear. You can hear the fear in people's voices when they talk about ChatGPT and its potential impact on classrooms and how it might impact the teaching learning engagement. What are you finding about ChatGPT within the teaching learning experience?
All right, I think I'll start by just framing this conversation a little, not so much in terms of ChatGPT, but AI on a whole. Now, AI has been used so many times this year, but the truth of the matter is we have been using AI for the past 10 years. Everything in your Google searches, your YouTube searches, recommendations, all of that incorporates AI. ChatGPT is just one model, one tool that is now available very broadly to the public and is now broadly available to students. Students who can use it to do their homework, who can use it to do research when teachers said, all right, these are the topics we're going to be doing, make sure your homework covers this. They go on ChatGPT rather than using even a Google search, type it in, they have the answers there right away. So we're framing this in what is a modern education? And as we are now approaching the introduction of civics, I think it's worth bearing in mind that any worthwhile education, especially in the 21st century, has to have a foundation in identity of self, but also values like integrity. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to break down a few of those. But overall, I see ChatGPT and AI tools as a way for us to enhance the learning process. And even as we think about the packed curriculum, maybe we need to start rethinking what shouldn't be in that curriculum, or how we can use tools like AI to lessen the load of teachers, because they do have a lot to teach in any given year. And teachers are always pressed for time.
In fact, it's the last point that you've made that I think perhaps the answer resides, Mr. Linvern Wright. This idea that teachers ought to start investigating new tools of engagement and new learning strategies, and that if the teaching profession would seek to make itself more knowledgeable of other strategies other than the talk and chalk, we might find that we don't have to go you know, we don't have to be picking out some things to put others in. What do you think about that?
Well, and even just to frame it a little too, I think maybe one of the things, and that's what the conversation is evolving into, that really, how do we have these things complementing each other rather than being rivals? And I think maybe that's a more useful way to put it, you know, to see how we can get these engaging each other. But yes, I think, you know, when we speak to, you know, teachers getting things to enhance what they're doing, I think a big part of what we ought to be looking at, because ChatGPT or AI doesn't come without reliable internet. I think it's one of the things that we have to be looking at. If it is that we really want teachers to be using, one of the things we have to take care of nationally is reliable internet in rural Jamaica, in areas in Jamaica, and primary schools if we want younger children to really get into this kind of thing. And then if it is that we really want now to package some of these things in civics, to, you know, I know this one-on-one who are doing things in terms of getting teachers now to package lessons and beam them in schools. During COVID time, there was an attempt to package lessons and beam them in schools, and maybe we could look at that kind of thing. But I just think that the vehicle to that happening is that we have to ensure that we have reliable internet and we have the kind of devices that are properly maintained in schools to ensure that we get that sort of thing. So I will tell you that I think teachers understand what to do, and I have been to many conferences myself. I hear many teachers, even without our doing workshops with them, getting involved and wanting to engage because of the nature of things, but the internet is there. But what really is a hindrance is the unreliability of the service that we get.
So we're talking about several kinds of gaps then, right. Ms. Golding. We're talking about the gap in terms of access. We're talking about the knowledge gap and how that knowledge gap comes about. Some of it is age and experience. Some of it is access to the technology. And so how does education overcome those gaps though? I don't know, you know, how have you thought it through in terms of your own delivery of education using the AI technology?
No, the truth of the matter is, as Mr. Wright rightly pointed out, we do have some gaps in infrastructure. Internet is unreliable, especially when you start to move outside of the KSA. Now, in terms of addressing this, we have to ground our solutions in our reality, which is some places just won't have internet. And while there is work happening from the Ministry of Technology Industry to ensure that we will eventually have a national broadband system, we're not there yet. But what is happening is trainings for teachers. I know, for example, e-learning, they just completed a series of workshops at the University of the West Indies teachers, basically encouraging them to use AI tools and breaking down even those knowledge barriers. So there's knowledge barriers that are being broken down. There's the infrastructure that will have to take time, but then outside of it, we will still have to find novel ways, or rather ways that introduce in terms of our context.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those simple things is just doing things physically. You know, do we have them generated at one point? If we're going to be talking about something like lesson plans do tend to take some amount of time, and it can be something that can be used to take the load off teachers. So can these lesson plans be generated? Can there be like central points to ensure that people even have physical copies, you know, of things that could be generated?
Because as you talk, there's so many ways that you could utilize the technology in the classroom, not just in respect of a particular subject, but in respect of varying methodologies, Mr. Wright, in respect of, as you said, generating lesson plans. There are so many ways, in engaging the student right in front of you. And so, you know, is there a kind of cohesive idea in Jamaica, among Jamaican schools, even where the technology, I get you, there are technology gaps. But even so, if the gap were to be filled tomorrow and we were all in the same place, would there be a common understanding of what needs to be done, Mr. Wright?
You mean needs to be done in terms of what? I'm not so clear.
In terms of education, teachers, those who teach, using the technology to in the classroom in the many ways that they can.
AI is the latest wave in technology. Now, technology really has been all over the place for how long, however long. I mean, many years.
I can tell you a story that I heard. I heard that every other profession has changed so drastically, except if Aristotle came back to the classroom, he would still find the same technology that he used in his time. So even though technology keeps changing and updating, teaching has been slow to respond to it.
Well, people have said that, but I think that if it is that we're looking at it, you see, in many instances sometimes, we have this impression that technology must lead us, rather than we understand how we manage technology. And I think you're asking about a gap. I think one of the things that we ought to be thinking about is whether or not we have technology leading how we do things, or we ensure that technology is managed to ensure that it does not outpace us. Because one of the issues I figure you've read or heard of Mo Gauda, this guy who was big in AI in Google. And one of his issues is that AI and these things are not, as people think, they are things that we ought to be thinking about in terms of cautioning ourselves about how we deal with these things. But the fact is that there are things about it that what you really want to meet for me is a teacher who understands how to manipulate these things, because it could be that it become a disadvantage. If it is, for example, look at a child, for example, who has an assignment to do. If it is that a child many children have already decided that, okay, they can just Google something and they just give it to you. A teacher ought to have that kind of mind, that kind of understanding, to know whether or not this is a child's work.
And knowledge of the technology, and understand how to use other kinds of technologies to counter that.
No, and I'm fine. But I'm also thinking that you as a teacher too can be so attuned with your child's way of thinking that when you read that, you know that this is not my child. So a big part of how this works too is that teachers have to be aware of the many different strategies, including the use of technology, but not just limited to it. About how we work through ensuring that a child is not really sidelined his or her mind because technology is there, because those are things that we want to be clear and careful about.
Miss Godiva Golding, you wanted to come in and say something?
Yes, I was chiming in to say we also want to be a bit cautious about putting the burden of the teachers to become investigators, become investigators like, did ChatGPT write this? I would rather us take an approach where the question that we ask is not, did ChatGPT write this, but what is the understanding of the student? Because even for a student to take their homework and plug it into ChatGPT and ask for the answers, they need to be able to ask the right questions. And so it's going to beg, like, what are we doing to teach critical thinking skills? What are we doing in terms of helping students to ask questions or even structure their writing an essay? Can I see your thought process from when you came up with the idea, what inspired it, what were your 3 talking points, and then how then you use some sort of methodology to say, I'm going to be breaking this down, this is going to be my topic sentence, this is going to be how I expound on it, this is how I link it. It's more or less what we would have been taught at the university level in critical thinking and writing. We need to take that same approach, and it has to be an iterative process. And again, the tools for assessment are scarce. But I think it is better that we assess things as they go along a pathway, not for any teacher to become an investigator. Nobody wants to do that, and children will use it. The resources.
We certainly have to have a continuation of this conversation. It has been intriguing, and we appreciate both of you for joining us. Our panel discussion takes a break, and this sports program will be right after.